In my very first video, I introduced you to the concept of functions, saying that they were repeatable blocks of code that the computer would first have you define and then have you run them or invoke them. However, I did not go into very much detail as to the specifics of functions. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining multiple new concepts involving functions that will help you when you are programming. So to start with, I said that there is a difference between invoking and defining a function. So I'm going to start by saying, so just give me a minute to start typing some things. So I have one function here, main. However, there is no limit to the number of functions you can have inside a single file, so I'm going to define another one here. So here I have now defined two separate functions. We have a, which says it's running a, and main, which says it is running main. Each of these is a function definition. It isn't telling the computer to do something, it is telling the computer how to do something. To tell it to do something in Google Script, we use this section here. In other programming languages, you use something else. So I'm going to tell it to run a, and it will never load, because that's what Google Script does. So as you can see, it says running a. That is because it has invoked a. Doing this and clicking the play button invokes the specific function that is listed here. When you invoke a function, it runs all of the instructions contained within the function in order. So we can also invoke functions ourselves, which I'll show in a minute. So just going to wrap up this example here. As we can see, it runs main. Notice that when we invoke a, main does not run, and when we invoke main, a does not run. Now we can, of course, make functions invoke each other, which we do like so. We have the name of the function and the two parentheses. These two parentheses are telling the computer to invoke the function, which we will do now. So I'm going to run main, which should run both of the functions. So as I was saying, it runs the instructions in order. So first it is going to console.log running main, and then it's going to go here to a. So it jumps up here, console.log's running a, and jumps back here to the end of the function, which we can see here. Now, another topic that I want to enforce here is declaring variables inside of functions. So I showed you how to declare variables inside a function like so. So you can do so like this. So I am going to here console.log one of them just so you can see. And now something that some of you may try and find confusing is I'm going to move a down here to kind of show something. So something to note is that it doesn't matter what order you define your functions in. So you'll notice we are referencing the function a here, but we're defining it later. So that is not a problem. So what I'm going to do is console.log var2. So we are defining var2 inside of main here on line 5, console.logging it on line 8 inside of main, and console.logging it again in A here on line 14. However, we will have a problem, as you will soon see. So I'm going to invoke main, and it says var2 is not defined on line 14. However, we have declared it, we have already defined it here. So why is it that the function was perfectly fine console.logging the string here in function main, but not in A? This has to do with what is known as scoping. Scoping is where, so the computer can have a lot of variables. However, it only retains them within the scope they are declared. So this var1 is defined inside of main, and what happens inside of main stays inside of main. It is not available anywhere else. You can think of these curly brackets here as saying what the scope of a function is. A variable is only available inside a scope where it is defined. A here, while we are invoking it here, it is defined outside of the scope of this function main here, so we cannot access it. So this begs the question of, so if variables are defined inside of, if variables are defined inside of one function, how do we access it across multiple of them? So there is one thing you could do is where you have what's known as globally scoped variables. And let's see if this works. And it does work. So, or maybe it doesn't. Let me see here. No, here we are. So it prints it in both of the functions. I should probably do it this way. And it will take a minute to load as always. So as you can see, we can access a string in both of these functions. However, globally scoped variables are usually not a good idea, just because it can lead to a what's known as a crowded namespace, which is basically where you have hundreds and hundreds of variables that everything can access. So then you run into problems where if this function wanted to declare var2, it couldn't. So you can see how this might become a bit of a problem. Well, apparently it still works there, but you get my point, is you want to have as little few global variables as possible. So that begs the question. Let me delete this first so it's a bit clearer. So that begs the question of how do I make it to where this function A has access to this value var2, and that is where parameters and arguments come in. We've already seen functions that accept arguments in the form of the console.log or logger.log. Notice the difference in how we're invoking A here with two empty parentheses and console.log here with this running main passed to it in between the parentheses. This running main here is an argument to console.log. So I'm going to show an example of making a function of your own which accepts some parameters. So function add x, y. So what this does here is this, so usually we leave the parentheses empty in the function definition. That is because without it, Google Script cannot invoke the function. At least sometimes it can't. Let me see here. Okay, maybe it can, but you're not supposed to do that. So this here is the parameter list. It's a list of what the function is expecting to be provided with. In this case, it expects to be provided with two arguments, x and y, it will call the first argument it receives x and the second one y. So for example, we might put here, I'm going to exclude this. So we might do it this way. So we're invoking the function and passing these two as arguments. So what this means is whenever we do this, it tells the computer to run the function add, and it's going to say x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 2. You don't need to note that you should not do anything like this inside of should not do anything like this inside of your code, because the computer is already defining x for you, so you do not want to do it yourself here. I'm going to show this in action here. So I'm going to have a couple of calls to add here. Let's make sure that I run the proper function here. Which one is it? Okay, so as we can see, 1 plus 2 is 3 is the first one. We passed the parameters 1 and 2. It said x is equal to 1, y is equal to 2. If I could highlight anything correctly, that would be helpful. Y is equal to 2, so 1 plus 2 is the same thing as 1 plus 2, or 3 as the case may be. The second one we got was 3 plus 7 is equal to 10, and it automatically assigned, for when it got to invoking this function, it said, okay, this time I'm going to say x is equal to 3 and y is equal to 7, and it went on its merry way. So that is how you use so first of all, parameters, and so officially speaking, these are parameters and these are arguments. Parameters belong to the function definition, while arguments are passed in the function invocation. You can you can get away with using the terms interchangeably. I have done so many times in this video, making mistakes like that, so I think most people would know what you mean if you were to mix up which one you called which. So that is how, for example, value I'm just going to comment some stuff out, so that way it's, honestly I should be deleting some of these, but I've been typing everything wrong. Okay. So that is how you pass variables from one function to one which it is invoking, which we'll see here. I think. There we go. So as you can see, A is able to now properly access var2 whenever we pass it as an argument to it. However, if I were to try to run A from here, it should be giving us an error message, right? No, it is not. Google Script likes to hide these things from you. I guess it's just nice that way. In A, undefined. So that's how we get variables from one function to a function it is invoking. But what if we wanted to get something back from a function? Like, what if we wanted to do something with this function add? That is where the return statement comes in. Now, a return statement, it's a little bit hard for me to explain, so I'll do my best. So I'm going to say return x plus y here. So what's going to happen here? So let me do it this way. just so I can show you guys exactly how it works here. So I'm going to run main. It'll just take it a second to update here. If it ever updates, here it is. So add 1, 2 returned 3. So essentially what the computer is going to do here is it's going to say, okay, I'm going to go to the function main because that's what I've been told to run. I'm going to define this variable 1 and variable 2. I'm going to log this message here and that message there. And then it gets here and it says, okay, I'm being told to console.log something, but part of that something I still need to evaluate first. So it jumps down here. You know what, I'm going to, maybe I should delete some of this just so it's a little bit clearer. So before resolving this, line 7 and logging this message, it first needs to evaluate what add 1, 2 is. So it jumps here. So what happens here is it says, okay, it's going to console.log this, and then it's going to return x plus y. So it says, what is x at this time? It is 1. What about y? It is 2. Well, okay, no, that didn't work. So it's essentially going to say, okay, what's x plus y? In this case, it's 1 plus 2, which is 3, so this evaluates to return 3. When it returns 3, that essentially is the equivalent of the computer deciding to do this. Perfect. So that is how it is getting this message here, the add 1, 2, returned 3. So the return statement, a couple of things about it. So basically the way I like to think about it is return x plus y is the equivalent of saying replace the statement replace this statement with this statement here, whatever it evaluates to inside of this function. So that it's kind of a slightly confusing concept, but it's like passing arguments. This while you would use, or now it's gone. So while I would use this to pass variables to add, this is how add passes stuff back to the function that invoked it. Now another, I think I'm just going to pause here really quick to get stuff ready. So I've pulled together this example to kind of show you the order that stuff runs in and kind of give a general rundown of how these functions would work. We have this function a, which accepts a single argument. We have this function main, which accepts no arguments. And we have this function add, which accepts 2. Now I've run this function main through the Google Script Editor, and it gives me this. Running main is running, it runs a, and it kind of goes about its way. So I'm going to kind of trace this for you. So the computer sees that I'm asking it, can you run main? Which it does so. It defines this variable 1 and this variable 2 and tells us that it is running main and it is telling us the value of var2. That is here. Next it gets to this line here, a var2, at which point it kind of pauses here and keeps track that it's here on this line 14, but it needs to resolve a before it can continue. It takes the value of var2, a string, and tells the function a to run with that as its argument. So when running function a, arg is, as we can see here, a string. And then there's nothing else here, so just console.log's done with a, which it does here. At this point, the computer resumes here at the end of line 14. Comes here to line 15 and says, okay, I'm being asked to invoke this function console.log, but before I can do that, I need to evaluate this expression between the parentheses. So it says I need to run add 1, 2, and get the value from that. So it says I'm going to invoke the function add with the first argument, parameter, whatever it is called now, x being assigned the value 1 and y being equal to 2. So it says x plus y equals x plus y. Well, that's 1 plus 2 equals 1 plus 2, which is 3, which we can see here. Afterwards, it returns x plus y. It evaluates x plus y as just 1 plus 2, which is 3, so it returns that value. Notice something interesting here. This statement here, I'll never be run, is actually telling the truth. There is no printing of the statement, I'll never be run. That is because return actually kind of exits this function. So everything after so the computer goes to this line 22, it says return x plus y, and it just goes back here without console.logging this message. So don't put anything after the return statement. So this now evaluates to 3. So it says add 1, 2, returned 3, which is here, and it resumes its normal flow, going to this line 16 here, and logs that it is done with main. So that is kind of a trace of how this all works. So the main thing to remember is that it has to resolve this add 1, 2 before it can do this console.log. So that's just something to keep in mind. So if you've watched my video about arrays, that video is also rather long, but as you can see, functions are very powerful but also rather complex. However, of course, they are an extremely helpful tool in your computer science, computer programming, or just having fun with Google Script in general. So I hope this video doesn't turn out too long, and I hope you enjoyed.